Next up, we have a special guest for this perfect guest actually for tonight. Josh Bearman is going to come up and tell us how it was that his magazine article from Wired magazine became the movie Argo, now out in theaters. Please give a big hand for Josh Bearman.
Thank you. Hi. That was really incredible to see you this, right? I have to say, I feel like maybe it's been a really long time since I saw any yo-yoing because it has gotten dramatically better. It was like next level yo-yoing. I feel like I've been fooled. That's real, right? Is it specially engineered to spin? Like, has the technology advanced in the past 15 years? Okay, it's technology. He says it's technology. Well, okay, so speaking of being fooled, I will tell you about the cinematic sleight of hand that is in theaters now called Argo, which is based on the nonfiction story that I wrote in Wired 5 years ago. Has anybody seen the movie? People seen it? Okay, so I'll summarize it briefly for people who haven't seen it. Or wait, no, it's not like a spoiler. They get out, the hostages escape. You know that even though it's very well done to make you be on the edge of your seat the whole time. So the story is during the Iran hostage crisis. Remember that one? I don't actually remember that one, I was too young. But, it was a terrible time, and the hostages, there's the Iranian Revolution, and they stormed the U.S. Embassy and took the embassy workers hostage and paraded them around on TV for 444 days. But little known at the time, 6 of the American embassy workers got out basically the back door of the embassy and were sort of on the lam in Tehran for some time, and nobody knew how to get them out. And it was sort of unknown that they were in hiding, but the clock was ticking because if they were discovered, they would be really bad. And so the CIA, but nobody knew what to do, and eventually the CIA decided to try to do an exfiltration, that's what they call it in the trade, to sneak them out. And they had to have a cover story, because the CIA always has these like elaborate cover stories. And this particular cover story was that they were going to be a Hollywood film production shooting this like mystical sci-fi epic in the desert. And it worked. They got them out. And so it was kind of like this little known kind of silver lining, in an otherwise sort of embarrassing episode in American history and geopolitically and whatever. And so I heard about this story. This friend of mine told me about it and was like, well, it was his idea. He was like, you should write this story in Wired, and then we'll sell it as a movie. And I was like, well, okay, sure, I don't know. I didn't really believe it. And in fact, I didn't believe it enough that I kind of didn't want to do it. And Steve Elliott has reminded me like a dozen times that he was like, I'll do it. And then seriously, as soon as he said, I'll do it, I was like, no, I'll do it. But I figured he was onto something. And so I wrote the piece. So this friend of mine who was an independent movie producer, he had come across the idea, like the story. Like it had been classified for a long time, and then it was declassified as part of the CIA's 50th Jubilee celebrations. It's true. 1997, they wanted to celebrate, and they're like, the CIA were the good guys, like this one time. And so they declassified it, Clinton, signed it, and so it was kind of known, it was like, it had been published, it had been written about in like the CIA Quarterly, Spies Quarterly or whatever it's called. And my friend David ran across it there, and he kind of tracked down. So like the CIA, in order to they actually created a fake production company to have their cover, in case they do really this deep cover, in case they get questioned or interrogated and you want to have this backup. So they actually had a company, they had a screenplay that they had picked up from this producer, this guy in Hollywood that the CIA had this long-standing relationship with. And, which I'll tell you guys about that guy in a second. And then they had a production, and they put ads in Variety, talking about their new movie and stuff. So my friend David had tracked down the ads, and he had like a couple of newspaper items. And then I went and tracked everybody down, and like the CIA guy, his name is Tony Mendez. That's who Ben Affleck plays. He's got the beard, and the salt, pepper hair and everything, so sexy. And he is really super charming and handsome in real life, I gotta say. Just like you imagined. or better, really, because I didn't know what to imagine. But wait, where was I? What was I saying last? Oh yeah, so Tony, I tracked him down. This is just the funny thing about him, which is like, he was the easiest person I ever tracked down to report a story. Because like I thought it'd be hard because he's a CIA agent. But I just Googled him and he was like making watercolors in his barn, and like so he had a website to like sell his watercolors. And so I just emailed him and it was, it was like shenandoah.lovely.com or whatever. And so I emailed him, he got back to me and he's like, yeah, totally, we'll do the story. So I talked to him and then I tracked down all the people who are trapped, they weren't really hostages because they hadn't been taken hostage. So they were called, they were sort of would-be hostages. They were colloquially called the house guests. And because they were trapped in the Canadian ambassador's house, that's where they wound up sort of hiding. And yeah, so then I did the story, and then it's Wired. I put it together, and I was like, this came out pretty good. It's like kind of a narrative. It is a narrative. It's an exciting narrative. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. An end. It's got an escape. And then I remember they had laid it out in the Wired magazine with like the illustration, because it's like a movie caper, fake movie caper, and so they laid it out with these storyboards. So the story was actually told in what looked like storyboards for a movie. And come to think of it, I probably owe that guy a drink. Whoever made those storyboards, or the art editor or whoever, because like it came out and it looked really good. And I remember thinking like, who'd be perfect for this is George Clooney. And it was like in my coffee shop, and I was probably one of like 1,000 people who said that exact thing in a coffee shop in Los Angeles that day. And then like I sent it, like well, listen, George Clooney bought it basically like 48 hours later, and so he eventually, and then it eventually turned out that he wanted to write and direct and star in it. I was like, oh great, this is like a dream come true. And it was very exciting, and then he actually didn't write it at all. Somebody else wrote it, and then he's like, I'm going to direct it, and he didn't direct it. And then Ben Affleck came in and made the movie, which, as you guys know, is all sort of, marketed as like based on a true story, and it's all awesome. Is anybody here wondering what parts are not true?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what do you think is not true?
Wait, will this ruin the movie?
No. Actually, I don't know. Is it going to ruin the movie?
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Probably
Yeah.
not.
Okay. So the like big chase down the tarmac.
Yeah.
That did not happen. I'm sorry. In fact, what happened was they just kind of went to the airport. There was like a mechanical delay for the plane. That happened. But I remember even like my editor of the magazine articles, like the end is kind of anticlimactic. We got to spice it up or something. They did actually have like, they weren't detained, but they were delayed because like the disembarkation forms, that whole detail with like the yellow and the white copies, carbon copies that wouldn't be in that really happened, and the dude kind of disappeared and came back and finally let them through. But no, the whole chase was not true. It is true that the Iranian regime, or sort of semi-regime at that point, had sort of pressed into service basket weavers to weave together all the shredded documents from the embassy, and had in fact put together a lot of all kinds of sensitive documents, which they then published in a book called like Secrets of the U.S. Den of Spies or whatever. And you could buy that. I think you can still buy it actually in Iran. Like it's a book, and there were pictures and stuff in there. So that was true. Although they did not figure it out just as they were, getting to the airport, and like so all that kind of stuff was like dramatized to make it all super exciting. What else? Anybody else have a question about what may or may not have been true? That is true. The housekeeper knew. Actually, there were multiple housekeepers. Housekeeper was actually a Filipino man, so it was a little bit different. But who then had to flee and everything. But yeah, no, there was, but the other staff did also know, and the other staff were Persian and they protected them, so that's true.
About the live reading in Hollywood.
Yeah, that's true, but slightly different. Okay, so here's an interesting part of the story that's not in the movie. So this is like the story behind the story. behind the story, maybe. So what happened was, Tony had an asset in the Hollywood biz named John Chambers, who was a makeup artist. He won an Academy Award for Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
And he had helped the agency kind of develop these like latex masks and all that stuff like that, Mission Impossible stuff where their face comes off and whatever. It was like that, except not at all really like that, because it took like 3 hours to put on the whole thing. But like, and now it's better, they say. It is a little bit more like Mission Impossible, but this guy sort of did all that stuff. So Tony was looking for this cover story that he went to John Chambers because he had worked with him many times. And in fact, Tony was an exfiltration specialist, so he had been all over the world, like getting people out of sticky situations. He had been in Laos and had to get a black CIA officer and a Laotian cabinet minister out of the country, and he called John Chambers in Hollywood and said, I need these two masks, and John Chambers was working on a movie starring Victor Mature and Rex Harrison. And so those are the masks that he sent. So the Laotian dude and the black CIA officer was Victor Mature and Rex Harrison, just like hanging out in Vientiane at a traffic circle. So now you know that like if you ever are somewhere like in the Piazza San Marco and you see like Victor Mature and Rex Harrison together, espionage is happening. So Tony turned to John and he came and he said we needed to kind of come up with this fake cover, and John was like, well, perfect, I have this script that's in turnaround, which means like the project has died essentially, and that he had been hired to do the alien heads for because it was a sci-fi epic, and that story that project was called Lord of Light, and it was based on this Roger Zelazny, Hugo and Nebula winning novel, like a very big sci-fi fantasy novel, and this crazy producer. It was the 70s, right? So everybody's just like on cocaine and out of their minds. And this guy raised money from his rich friends, optioned Lord of Light, hired John Chambers to make the alien heads of this crazy sci-fi story, and hired Jack Kirby to do all the concept art. Jack Kirby, of course, is, heralded comic artist and created X-Men and all that sort of thing. And so they had all that stuff, and he had the script. And so that's what Tony actually used. He brought that stuff to Tehran. But the interesting thing about that project is that right before days before this all happened, that project was sort of still going, and Barry Geller, the producer, had this grand scheme where he was going to build the sets for this movie and then leave it there as this theme park called Science Fiction Land. And he had held a press conference for the citizens of Denver where he planned to film the movie and build the sets and then leave it there. And he flew Jack Kirby there, so Jack Kirby's there, John Chambers is there, Rosie Greer is there wearing like a silver alien outfit because he was supposed to be in it. And he had all the drawings, and he was telling all the assembled journalists there, like, look, there's going to be a bowling alley staffed by robots, there's going to be a voice-operated magnetic car, there's going to be a mile-high dome, and it's going to be so awesome, and we're going to make this movie. And so this press conference was this elaborate thing, and had the table read, like in the movie Argo, but at the thing, it seemed very clear to the assembled journalists, like, this doesn't really add up. And so they started looking into it, and then they discovered that, first of all, a bowling alley staffed by robots is not possible, and the production manager for this cocaine-addled producer was actually taking all the money, and so it all kind of came crashing down. And then Tony showed up and was like, "Let's use this as our fake movie," and so that's how it came to be. And
Was the producer real? Was the
Alan Arkin character? Yeah, kind of, a little bit. Yes, no, not exactly. He was John Chambers' partner, this guy Bob Seidel, who was still alive. John Chambers died. Johnny died, that's what they called him. And Bob Seidel's still alive. He is selling some kind of cosmetic products in Las Vegas these days. And he was kind of the secondary partner, and he did kind of have that whole attitude where he's like, you want to sell a lie, you get the press to do it for you. It's like, this town runs on bullshit. That's why they put their ads in Variety for their fake movie, and the whole thing was they're supposed to fool Iran if it ever came to that, right? But they fooled Hollywood instantaneously. Everybody in Variety was like, ooh, there's this new player in town. We got to call Studio 6 Productions. So this CIA staffed fake ass office with one chair in it at Sunset Gower Studios started getting calls from producers I got this great idea. It's there's a mummy who comes to life in the Louvre, and they started having to take meetings and calls from people who wanted to sell them their projects. All right, so
Did Lord of Light get made?
it did not, tragically. Although that guy is still he's trying to piggyback on this Argo thing. He still owns the rights and all the drawings and stuff. It's probably could be a pretty cool idea. Actually, there's a guy making a documentary about that guy called Science Fiction Land. The trailer's on Kickstarter to bring it all full circle right now.